Part 3 of the NEXTGEN 5-star body installation. We are now ready to put the nose on this bad boy. The first thing I'm going to do to start setting the nose on is I'm going to set my crossmember on the ground at max travel. Installing the nose with the crossmember at max travel will ensure that I don't pound the valence into the ground, and at the customer's request we have a specified gap underneath there because he will have a splitter. Like I say, this is a road course car, so he will build a splitter that will sit underneath this valence, and there needs to be that certain height, which is 1/2 of an inch, dedicated for that, so that we don't pound that splitter into the ground on decel or when he goes over bumps. So, like I said, I've got the crossmember on the ground. I've got the rear of the chassis blocked up to a specified height that I expect to see the travels at, and we are ready to start knocking this nose out. To ensure the proper alignment on these, I like to use my ballpoint pen and put a couple of alignment marks. One at the hood pin bar, two at the top of this body line here for the inactive grill. Another one down here just above the bumper bar, and then finally one down here at the bottom of the active grill, the actual air inlet for the radiator. When I'm doing this, my pen wants to fall to its lowest point in that body line, in that radius, so it leaves a nice, clean, tight line there for me to line up against. Now all I got to do is line those lines up. When I am aligning my bumpers, I like to start at the top and work my way down the front bumper. This does two things. One, it ensures that the top area where it's visible is the most correct. If you start at the bottom and then you work your way up, these top body lines could be just a minimal amount off, and it'll show. And two, it's easier to hide a misalignment at the bottom because a lot of times you'll have a valence that covers this, you'll have your grill screen that goes in there, so it's a lot easier to hide a misalignment at the bottom. As you can see there, our lines are really nice and in line, as well as perfectly straight across the marks. Our bumper's now riveted together, and just a little bit of brake clean takes those ink marks right off there. You don't even know they were there, but yet you've got a perfectly aligned bumper. Here you can see my rivets. I spaced them out 2 inches just like I did on the rear bumper in video 1. I've got them as tight to the outer cover edge as I can to ensure tight fitment on that seam. I use my large OD rivet washers. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Next step, I've got to do a little bit of trimming on this top seam where my hood pin bar will lay underneath there, and also I need to use my hole saw, as I did in video 1, to cut that seam out for my bumper bar. There you can see that the 5-star mold on that corner where the fender attaches to the nose, it's holding the fender at an odd angle so that I can't get the seam correct. So to fix this, I will take my tin snips and my file. I'm going to go in here and remove a small portion of this lower corner. There you can see the small piece that I am removing. Now I've got a little corner there that will also impede me. So by using my small file, my half-round file, I can clean that corner up. There you have it. Now you have a nice corner to put my fender on, and I don't have to worry about any alignment issues. I've now got the nose and fenders riveted together. I didn't go through the complete process because it's pretty self-explanatory how these go together. As you saw, I did have to clean this corner up just a little bit to get that nice and tight. I'm pretty happy with it on both sides. So after I did that, I went through and I got my center notched out. I used my hole saw. I cleaned it up nice and tight so that I can get the bumper bar as close to the nose as possible. The way these bumper bars are shaped, kind of coned out in the center, you need to be able to get those as tight as you can. If there's any gap there to the bumper bar, it's going to be difficult to get the entire nose attached correctly, and it just looks a lot better when it's nice and tight. I tape up the corners of my windshield because as you're trying to start mounting these fenders, this corner tends to dig in and it'll scratch and damage your Lexan window, also on your A-posts and your cowls. So I tape all that up just for safety to make sure I don't damage anything. Before I go and start putting this fender on the car, I'll notch this fender back just a little bit, but I will take into account where my corners are and where my overhang is. I will have to do quite a bit of notching to get this fender to fit correctly, but because I have to center it over that tire, there's quite a ways it needs to go, so I'll kind of rough some of that in to start. On the right side, it's the same story. I've got it all taped up, and we're ready to move forward. I've got my spacing close. I just notched this out enough to where I can get my tire centered in my wheel well. I might still be just a hair off there, but I'm close enough to where I can make a rough mark there so that I know roughly where it's got to sit. As you can see, I'm still a little bit long on this side. I'm going to have to take this down quite a ways, but I just want to go far enough to where, again, my alignment is close. Now that I'm happy with my setback as far as where my nose is at, I have a rough measurement on where they need to go. I'm going to pull this back off and I'm going to lock my front bumper bar in with Clecos. This is the difference between the new 5-star bumper bars and the old design of 5-star bumper bars. They were a series of small bends to get the radius of the bumper bar. Now they sell them, they've got this nice arch in it, and those fit way, way, way better on these noses than the traditional type of bumper bar. But regardless, it is absolutely crucial to get that point as close to the front side of that bumper. That's why when we cut it out and we grind it, we try to get it as flush as possible, just so that you don't have any issues with crowning or any weird look to the front of this. We got the bumper bar clecoed in, so it's located. I've got the nose back on. I did a little bit more trimming at the back of the fender for a little bit more clearance there on both sides. So there's a couple different ways that we can go about moving forward at this point. One, we could build our front bumper support mounts. We could build our hood pin bar mounts and lock the nose down to the chassis. Or, the way I prefer to do it, I can do the rest of my fitment on my fenders, cleco them down to the doors, and then move forward to my nose supports. The reason I prefer to do it like this is I feel that by mounting the back of these fenders and getting those locked down exactly where I want them, at that point it will hold the nose in its exact spot, and then I could build my supports and tie everything together. When I'm getting ready to cut these, I will take my masking tape and I will lay a straight line down the edge of this door, because I know that this cowl panel is basically a straight extension off of that door. So I'll lay a straight line there, and then I'll use my masking tape and I'll kind of curve this same radius onto this fender. I'm not really a one and done type guy. I'm not just going to take and whittle that line out and just hope for the best. So I'm going to cut it back a little ways, give myself a little bit of room in case I missed it. I'm going to leave myself about a 1/4 inch left of this tape, and a 1/4 inch before this line. So one thing you got to remember is which side of the line you got to cut on. So one thing that I typically do is I'll take my Sharpie and I'll draw an arrow to the line that I know I've got to go on. Because if I go through and I cut and then I cut on the back side of this one, I'm going to be over an inch long from where I want to be. So like I say, I'll cut through about all but a 1/4 inch of this, and I'll leave about a 1/4 inch of that line there just in case I made a mistake. When I'm roughing these out, I don't have a problem doing my rough cuts with a pair of tin snips. You just got to be careful on some of these edges because it will chip the gel coat. So as long as I'm not getting anywhere close to where my cut lines are going to be, my final cut lines are going to be, I can rough it out with some tin snips just to save time. But whenever I go to my final cuts, and even these almost final cuts, I'm going to use my air sauce so that I don't break that gel coat away from the edge. It just makes it hard to kind of tidy up and clean up if I've got that edge all broken away. Now that I see that I'm really close here, I'm about a 1/4 inch off, just about the amount that I had left over. I'll take my tape that's another color. This is just some electrical tape. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself this exact radius with this tape. Now that I can easily see the color and tape difference, I know exactly where the edge of my line is. My edge of my line is the width of this tape away from that outside edge. So I'm going to put my panel back up in here, and I'm going to clip it down in its spot that it wants to be at. Realigning my back line back here so that I know that my wheel well's in the right spot. Now all I've got to do is just copy where my lines are, the edge of my line, and I'll be exact with the location of my cut edge. Now all I've got to do is go back and remove the black, and I know that my edge will be perfect. So now you can see where our cut lines are. We need to take just a little bit more off this end corner right here, and it will be just beautiful. And there's our cut. Always take your time doing this. Do not try to rush this. It's a lot easier to take material off than it is to try to add some. We are now reattached. We have a cleco in it there, and we have a really nice wheel well alignment. Next up, we need to check that template and make sure everything works. We've got our template on, and it's got pretty good fit. It is up just a hair in the back. It's within tolerance, so I'm not too worried about it. But one thing that you can do to manipulate that is this bottom corner here. You can go forward with that or back with that, and by doing that, it will raise or lower the top of this fender right there where that template is. If you shove it forward, it actually buckles that fender a little bit more and gets that a little bit higher. As it is right now, I could probably stand to slide it back about a 1/4 inch, and that will help clear that gap up right there, just because it will bring that point down, and bringing that point down will help seal the back of that template up. Now you can see after readjusting that fender, we've got that template just that much better. The last thing we have to do on this fender is figure out where we want this fender to end. I'm not a big fan of leaving them long and having a huge overlap to that door. A bunch of crap gets packed in there, and it kind of bulges this door up, and it may see some star cracks and fractures in the gel coat because of it. But I don't want to cut it so thin that if anything happens, you have to put a new fender on it, and the fender might be a little bit shorter from 5-star. I don't want them to run into any issues because I've shortened the door too much. So what my plan is I'm going to shorten this fender to about where the point is on this A-post. Having it hang off there just looks kind of silly, I think. So I'm going to shorten it a little bit, and I'm going to put a similar radius to what the back door has, the back of the door has, just so that it looks, you know, somewhat symmetrical front and back. Also, what I'll do is I'll mark the door after I get the fender trimmed. I'll mark the door, and I can bead roll that door and give it a nice flush transition from the door to the fender, and you know, it just kind of helps clean the body up a little bit. So like I say, next step, I'm going to mark out where I want to cut that. I can go cut that, set that on here, finish my holes, finish mounting it, and mark the door for bead rolling. Fender's all clecoed on, but look what we've got going on right down here. That's the end of the door, as you see, a little bit exposed on that corner, and that door is probably the better part of maybe 3/32 of an inch thick. When I pull this rivet, when I'm ready to rivet it, this is going to be a massive dent, and then what you'll see is right here on the top, you'll see a crack start to form. Remember your training. Remember in the previous videos how we would put a washer underneath there to get that elevation the same height so that when we pull that rivet, it doesn't distort that corner. Stuff a washer in there or some sort of shim and you're going to be a lot happier with your finished project. The only other thing that we could do is go back and cut that door down so that it sits more flush. Well, by doing that, then we take away our mounting surface and then we allow it to have a bend right here at the back surface. This is not going to hold itself flat because the mount there on the cowl is gone. Just like on the other side, we're now ready to trim out the top of this fender. We will use the same systems on this side as we did on that side to ensure that our cut lines are correct, we don't overcut this, and you know, we just ultimately have a really good look here. This is the long fender look that I was saying. As you can see, I've got my cleco at the top where I do want to start my cut. I'm ready to go ahead and mark this one out. Got it tape lined, and I am ready to trim. Doesn't that look a lot better where it comes off that A-post point? I feel like that looks a lot better. We've now got our cowl fitted on both sides. We know where our nose location is going to be. Now we've got to finish up checking out our templates so that we can locate the bottom of that door. We've got our template on. I've got the other side checked. I do need to work on the other side a little bit, but this side is just about perfect. So now that we've got our door top located, we're happy with things on the nose, the location, the offset of the nose is correct. Now we're ready to locate and mark the back of the doors. Once we get the back of this door located, I'll Sharpie a mark up vertically, and I'm going to bead roll that so that that fender to door seam is nice and flush. You can see on one of my other cars where I bead rolled that door, and it's just got a really, really flush transition. And installed my bumper brackets, and on this video the customer supplied these 5-star parts, so I went ahead and used them. I've showed you guys in other videos how I mount a weld-in bung to the side of the frame and I run my bumper tubes to that, but on this one I felt like this would be a good opportunity to show how I do these. So the first thing you're going to do is they come cropped. You're going to make sure that your cropped end, your notch end, is the correct angle. After you get them in there and you know that they're the correct length, you can trim them down so that they fit and then just kind of tack them in. I did tack it to the mount there so that I could get everything mocked up and then drill my hole, and I know that it's not going to move. That's a tack that's easy to cut loose and clean up, so I'm not too worried about it. I did pull the nose loose. I pulled my clecos out of the nose and I spaced it up on my lead block here so that I had a gap between the bumper bar and the nose so that I can weld a portion of each side and know that it's locked down and I'm not going to melt the bumper itself. This residue from welding will clean right off there, so I can clean that up and it won't be an issue. But by welding that up and ensuring that everything is in the correct spot, I can go through and drill this now and there's no worries that it's going to be right. Now I can go ahead and run my supports up to the bay bar. I can weld all that stuff in. I don't need to reattach the nose because I've got it tacked in place and I know it's not going to move. Once I get these uprights in place, I can remove the entire bumper bar assembly, finish welding everything, weld the bottoms and the sides of my mounts to the frame. I don't risk melting the bumper or destroying anything. I could put it all right back on. I've got to take the nose off anyways because I need to bead roll these doors. So by figuring out and finishing a couple of different spots, I can do more than one thing when I have the nose off. I've now got my bumper tubes as well as my uprights installed on both sides. I went ahead and drilled the mount. Everything is now solid. It is tacked, so you got to be gentle with it, but it is all tack welded, supported, and I'm ready to go back up to either blocks or jack stands so that I can weld everything up. Having these uprights installed will keep the nose supported vertically so that when you're pushing on air, when you're carrying a large amount of speed and this nose has got all that weight on it, it doesn't distort the nose and change the height of it. It can actually translate that downforce into the suspension and push the car down into the track, and you don't lose it through distortion of the nose and the body. Before I raise this car up, I need to note where my fender is in relation to the surface of the ground here. This will help me line up my skirts later on down the road. If I was to take them and mount them now, I would have to rivet these in place, and I really don't want to rivet that stuff down. So I can do the same thing by just getting a measurement and marking the body and recording where that measurement's at, so I can basically subtract from that measurement and know where to put the bottom of my skirt at. You want these skirts to be as low to the ground as possible, but you don't want them to impact the ground. Keeping them low keeps the air out from underneath the car and just helps seal the body up for downforce. I just put 2 little pieces of tape on here and I marked exactly where 10 inches was, and I recorded that with that little tiny mark you can see right there. Again, when I get this thing up on stands, I know exactly where the surface of the ground is by going off of that measurement. Now that we've got everything supported, in video 1 we did the roof mounts as well as the deck lid mount and the rear bumper. We had the entire roof and quarters supported. In video 2 we mounted the doors, upper and lower, as well as the cowl panel, the Nerf bar. In video 3, we got the entire nose put together, put the front bumper assembly in it, and we got the nose in its right spot. Now that we've got everything located, we're able to go to stands because we're not relying on those heights anymore. We've got everything figured, and we have enough adjustment to where if we do set it down and we're a little bit off on some spot, we can get it back with our adjustments. Now I am ready to pull the nose off so I can weld up the entire front bumper assembly and not risk melting the bumper cover. While I have the nose off, I'm going to remove the doors and do my bead roll so I can get a nice smooth transition from my fender to my door. I can also pull the rear bumper loose, weld up the entire back bumper section. I can weld up my deck lid mounts. I can weld up all my lower door supports when the doors are off. I mean, yeah, we're in the home stretch now. After I get all this welded, put it all back together, I can start mounting my hood. I can do my fender supports in the front as well as the rear, and I can put my skirts on. I've also got mounts on my door and on my quarter panel to measure the heights so that I can mount my skirts. I don't even need this car on the ground to put the skirts on it because I've done all my math and I've calculated it all so I know exactly where they go. Okay, we're now ready to bead roll this door so we can get it finished up and installed. I did have to remove a little bit of material down here, as you can see where my line goes over that break in the bottom of the door. Obviously my bead roller is not going to roll through there. Also at the top of this where it overlaps the cowl panel, it also has a hem up here that's going to be hard to roll through. So I did have to do a little bit of removal up there, and I could tidy it up after I'm done. But yeah, we're ready to roll this thing through. I did go through already, and I ran a couple of test panels through it, so I know that my offset is correct so that my fender and my door lay flush. I've got it all ready to go, and I'm ready to start rolling. And there we have it. We've got a beautiful step roll in it, and that's going to look really, really good up against that fender. So we've got our right side door ready to go. I've got the this area notched. I did not notch this section because I need to put it against the cowl panel first and make sure where it's going to fit. But also the plastic is still on this. As long as it's not all wadded up and you're trying to roll over a huge knot of plastic, it's not going to affect the bead roll one bit. And as you can tell, that plastic didn't change anything about it. It's just, it's more of a nuisance than anything. But no, I think that's going to work out perfect. I've got my doors bead rolled. I've got my fenders back on it. I see that I'm a little bit tight right there, so I've got a little bit of trimming to do. I've also got a little bit of trimming on the other side. Now I've got my side skirts on. I went ahead while the car was down. I measured it and I marked where I need to go off of, so I have a measurement. Now, there's a couple different ways you could put these on. You can put these on where you just slap them on the side, you drill them and you rivet them, and you go through that lower door bar that we put in, that 1/2x1 lower door bar. Or you can go a different way, which I've done before, and I think it looks super, super cool. And because this car isn't going to get the doors ripped off of it every single weekend, this is a road course car, and the car owner wants it to look a little bit more sporty and a little bit more flush. What I'm going to do is, now that I've got these on, I'm going to go mark my entire top line. I will measure down this distance to this roll in the side skirt, and I will trim the door, the fender, and the quarter panel all off at that same length. Then I could slide my side skirt up underneath the fender and the door and the quarter, and this seam will look just like this seam, where it's super, super, super flush. I've now got my Sharpie line down the entire top, so I know where the top of my skirt is. I will remove my skirt, measure the distance of this flange here that will sit underneath the door, fender, and quarter, make a second line, which will indicate the bottom of this, and then trim my door, my fender, and my quarter panel off. I have to take the door off because I could put it in my stomp shear and I could shear it. I can trim my fender with my air saw as well as my quarter panel, but I can't really trim my door with my air saw because that's kind of a pain in the butt. But also, because the door is so thin and the fiberglass in the fender is so much thicker and the fiberglass in the quarter panel is so much thicker, I'm going to bend a hem on the bottom of that door, which will double that thickness up, which will get it closer to the thickness of the fender and the quarter. And then when it's all overlapped over that side skirt, it's just hella flush. Now you can see we've got the door trimmed, we've got the quarter trimmed, and everything sits nice and flush against that that recessed edge. Now you are going to run into one little issue with the front of the skirt when you do it this way, but because it's long enough in the back, we've got that extra hang off over there. We can go ahead and modify the way we attach the front. And the reason is, where it rolls around the front here, there is no recess for it. It's got the wrong radius. It's designed to go over the top of that fender nut underneath. So because it's got the wrong radius, we've got to use a heat gun and we've got to work on that. So the best way to do this, I've found, is take it and cut it off back here to where it's got the roll in it, and then we'll trim a little bit out of the bottom, and then we can slide it forward and use our heat gun and manually roll that around. We can retain that edge there, and then we could trim it off, the excess off the inside of it. This will also get rid of this goofy roll on the bottom, which I've never really liked. Now, also, when I hang these, as you can see, I hang it a little bit below the chassis. It's actually about 3/4 of an inch below the chassis. And that is so I can go through and trim a little bit of this off. I know that when I wrap this around, I'm going to have to remove some of this edge anyway. So by mounting it a little bit low, it gives me a little bit of room to trim that off and not see any issue. Also, I feel like when this is tapered and it's short in the front and a little bit longer in the back, it gives it a little bit of a raked look, and it's a little bit more racy. I've grabbed this small piece of material. This is 1¼ OD material, and it will create a nice little roll that will fit up behind this fender. I've also got my thick gloves on because this is going to get hot. I choose not to use a heat gun. I actually prefer to use this Burns-O-Matic mini torch, and it just heats stuff up faster rather than having to wait so long with the heat gun. And when you're using a heat gun, because it takes longer to heat up, that heat spreads out further. This way I can focus that heat, I can heat it up quicker and keep that heat compressed into one little area so that I can bend it right in that spot and not have to worry about it, modifying the skirt any further back. And there we have one seriously flush side skirt. The final thing that we've got to do when we set this car back on the ground, we will need to trim off a little bit of that front just so that we can kind of taper it back and make sure all of our clearances are good. But there you go. We got a side skirt on. Now we got to do it to the right side. Here's the look of the finished product as far as the side skirt goes. I went ahead and I dropped it down and I trimmed off that front edge. It's nice and tight. It may need just a little bit more trimming. I've only got about just a hair underneath it in the plate. It is sitting on the cross member, so it may be alright. It may clearance itself, but the back is up a little bit, but that's common because if you try to run the back down all the way, first off, when you're on the throttle and it squats in the back, it may pound that into the ground. And secondly, it's going to be hard to unload out of the trailer. It's going to be hard to roll across the scales. There's several issues there. So unfortunately, you do have to leave the back up a little bit. Putting the front down as tight as possible is a benefit, just to try to keep that thing sealed up as much as possible. It turned out really good. I really like the flushness of it, and yeah, overall pretty happy. I haven't quite got the back of the fender riveted down yet. I've still got to install the hood hinges. That's where that line is right there. I've got to do a little bit of cutting there, but before I can do that, I need to get the hood mounted. So our next step is to mount the hood.